Today we're going to talk a little bit about internet advertising and mobile or other forms of digital advertising. I've always liked this quote by Mark Andreessen: "The internet always has been and always will be a magic box." And who, you might ask, is Mark Andreessen? Well, he was the co-author of Mosaic. Mosaic eventually evolved into Netscape, and he was the co-founder of Netscape. And Mosaic and Netscape were the first browsers that really kind of looked and behaved like browsers we would recognize today. And so he's a pretty important figure in the development of the internet in terms of how we relate to it. And I think it is kind of important to remember just how much the internet has changed life as we know it in essentially one generation. Everything that we do now is impacted, it seems, in some way by digital internet technologies. And while we think a lot about how much the internet has impacted education and entertainment and information gathering and dissemination in the developed world, the impact of the internet on the developing countries and third world countries is even more astounding in that it has opened up potential for learning and the potential to just know something about the rest of the world that has many times been lacking in so many places of the world. So it really is, I think, one of these things where it's sometimes useful for us to remind ourselves just how much this has changed everything, and how fortunate we are really to be working in fields where we're working with internet technology and we're part of the content creation that is available and accessible to so many people so easily. Now, this chart shows kind of the pretty dramatic growth of internet advertising expenditures in the period of 24 years, and these are U.S. figures. These are not global figures, but back in the few years before 2000, there was really very little money being spent on internet advertising, and you can see kind of the growth curve where it really starts to peak up and grow much more exponentially, starting right, kind of around 2010, 2014, in that area there where it really took a dramatic turn and became much more dominant. And right now we're talking about, in 2019, the U.S. ad expenditures on digital advertising were about $124 billion. Now, it wasn't that long ago, really, that in advertising, college advertising programs across the country, and maybe still in some places, that internet advertising was kind of considered this new thing, this non-traditional type of advertising. In some cases, people kind of thought it was almost a fad where it might become popular for a little while and then kind of level off and just become kind of a secondary medium. And that clearly has not been the case. What a lot of people still, however, do not realize is that internet advertising is now the dominant form of advertising expenditure in the U.S. So let's look at some of the figures here. So nearly 125 billion spent on internet advertising in the U.S. in 2019, and that's a lot more. It was only 72 billion in 2016. It's about 3 times what it was in 2014. It was only $7 billion in 2003. That really is exponential growth, and for any sector of business. Typically in advertising expenditures, if solid growth is usually in the 2 to 4% range per year, and these are growth figures that are doubling every couple of years. Digital advertising now accounts for more than a third of total U.S. advertising spending, and there is more money being spent on digital advertising in the U.S. than on television. That happened a couple years ago. Internet surpassed print advertising expenditures way back in 2012. And interestingly, mobile ad spending now accounts for more than 2/3 of the total digital ad spending. And so keep that in mind when you look back here at this growth rate. The one thing that you also have to keep in mind here is the first iPhone was released about 2007, I think summer of 2007. So if you wait a couple of years until enough people start to have iPhones and the mobile technology starts to catch up and we start to see more websites that are mobile friendly, and as more people get smartphones, that growth rate is almost entirely affected by the growth of mobile advertising spending. And now, as this line shows, mobile ad spending is most of where the digital ad spending is going. Okay, 2019, the most recent data available. Internet advertising expenditures increased in the United States at a rate of 16% higher than they were in 2018. And that's actually a low percentage increase for the internet advertising industry. And part of that is certainly affected by COVID. All right, this particular slide kind of breaks down where the money is spent in digital advertising according by advertising format. Now, the data here, as all of the data that I'm using in this lecture, come from the annual Internet Advertising Revenue Report commissioned by IAB, which is the Internet Advertising Bureau. It's the main Internet advertising trade industry organization in the United States, and they commission an annual revenue report that PricewaterhouseCoopers conducts. So that's where all these charts and things are coming from. And to kind of interpret this in terms of where the share of the pie is going. So about half, a little bit under half of the total revenue comes from search. And that's actually a little bit less than it used to be in terms of overall percentage. It used to be a little bit over 50% went to search. So search is still a huge part of the internet advertising revenue chain, no question, and will continue to be. But we are seeing with somewhat more dramatic increases in some of the other forms of internet advertising. But search is still kind of the biggest go-to expenditure in terms of where digital advertising revenues go. So search engine optimization, all those kinds of things that advertisers and brands will do to try to increase the likelihood that their website or that their link will show up very high in search results. Is where you want to spend a lot of money. The other forms, though, banner advertising is second, and that's your traditional internet digital advertising. Now, banner advertising includes the static banner ads that you're used to seeing both on desktop and mobile platforms, but it also includes rich media ads, which would be interactive forms of ads, and including video playing ads within those kinds of traditional banner type boxes and formats. So that's the banner advertising. The third major category is video advertising. It's video primarily on streaming sites, and that continues to be a growth area and a very kind of exponential growth area as consumers are spending more and more of their time watching, more and more of their entertainment time watching streaming video on digital devices rather than watching traditional television and broadcast cable and things like that. And then the last area is kind of called other, but that's more of a catch-all, and that is primarily composed of classified advertising, lead generation advertising, and kind of the up-and-comer in this other category, and it may eventually become a category unto itself, is audio advertising. We're seeing a lot of growth in audio advertising, especially in the last 3 years or so. And when you think of audio advertising on the internet, you might first think of, if you're like me and you're too cheap to buy the premium package on Pandora or Spotify, all those audio commercials that you have to listen to when you're listening to your streaming music platform. It includes that, to be sure, but the big growth in audio advertising in the last few years has been in podcast advertising. In terms of the kinds of ads we're going to do in COMM 353, we're going to work with kind of the fixed size banner ads. That's a good place to start. We're going to put animation in them, but we're going to go with fixed size at the kind of the technical level that we want to get at in this class. So you will use fixed size specifications for your banner ad campaign. I have a link on Canvas in the links and resources section that will take you to the International Advertising Bureau online format. So you can click on that and you can find the listing of all the different fixed sizes, both for desktop and for mobile. And I would encourage you to use maybe a couple of both. I think it's especially important for you to learn how to lay out and design advertising for mobile applications, because that's where we're seeing so much of the money being spent. And we're talking about really small ads, and learning how to design well and do good layouts and have compelling communications in really small environments is kind of a challenge, but it's worth experimenting with that and trying to learn how to do that well. Similar to most other forms of advertising, internet advertising also has had a long tendency of irritating consumers. And whether it's pop-up ads that you have to click on them and close them and find the little X to where you can close that ad. There used to even be pop-up ads that would float around your page, and so you kind of had to chase them with your cursor and hit them just right so that you could close them. Or whether it's ads that are noisy, or pages that have so many ads on them that they take forever to load and things like that. There are a lot of things that people find irritating about internet advertising. And like most forms of advertising, consumers will find ways to avoid advertising whenever they can. We always have to remember that for most consumers, advertising isn't an interruption of what they want to do. And so you may have heard of the concept of lean ads, which is a fairly recently developed concept. I think it was 2017 that IAB came out with their lean ad principles. And the reason that they did this was because more and more consumers were using ad blocking software, and if ad blocking software became too prevalent, too easy to use, then kind of the entire advertising support for internet advertising can start to be a little bit shaky. So Internet Advertising Bureau came up with this set of lean principles for lightweight, encrypted, ad choices supported, and non-invasive, in an effort to kind of self-regulate the industry, to try to make the advertising a little less annoying and therefore make it a little bit more accepted by the public. And so this is a concept that you will hear a lot about, and that these are kind of the driving principles that guide internet advertisers in terms of how they produce advertising to try to keep the ads from being too annoying and too big of files. And so for the acronym LEAN, the L stands for lightweight. So there are ranges of what are considered to be acceptable file sizes, so that the ads should not be the things on the page that are causing pages to load slowly. Encrypted has to do with consumer protections about their identity and about their IP addresses and things like that. And so the encryption is supporting HTTPS encryption to try to make for a more secure advertising and user interface. Ad choices supported. That's probably something that you see pop up every once in a while on your browser, or you might see that on ads where there'll be a little box on there that says ad choices. And that's been a driving force in this industry where the feeling is that consumers should have some voice in terms of the types of ads that they are exposed to, so that if there are ads that they would prefer not to see, they can be able to establish those parameters and get advertising that's hopefully more relevant to them. And then the last part is this idea of non-invasive advertising, that that the advertising should not be interfering with the content that the user went to that site to see. So it shouldn't be like covering up the content. It should not have audio that just starts playing automatically. The user should be in control of the audio and things like that. So this is the principle of lean, and it isn't a law. It isn't an industry regulation. It's a self-regulation initiative whereby advertisers are trying to group together and kind of self-police to make the advertising environment a little less annoying for the consumers. Here's kind of the basic set of technical guidelines for banner ads and fixed size ads for both desktop and mobile. First principle is keep your file sizes as small as possible. Your image resolution should be at no greater than 72 pixels per inch, and size the images at the right dimensions so that they are not, wider and taller and wider than they need to be, and then have to be scaled. So 72 pixels per inch, that gets you about the smallest file size that you can have and still have reasonably good clarity and resolution with your images. Animation is generally done at 24 frames per second. Now, we may be starting to see some changes to 30 frames per second. That's now a default in Animate for the animation pace, but technically banner ads should still be done at 24 frames per second and with 15 seconds of animation maximum on the ad. Video ads should be 30 seconds maximum. Audio should be play on click. In other words, the audio should not just immediately start as soon as somebody lands on the page. The user should have to interact with that ad by clicking on it or hovering over it before the audio starts, so that the user has some control over whether or not, if they're sitting in a Starbucks and all of a sudden their audio starts playing, right? And then ads should be clearly distinguished from any other content on the page. You don't want to be trying to fool people into thinking that an ad is something else, that it's some other kind of content that's part of the publisher's content, page publisher's content, that it should, if it's an ad, it should clearly look like an ad. All right, I wonder how many of you remember this viral ad. It was for Burger King. It's called the Subservient Chicken. This may kind of predate your kind of internet browsing part of your life, but let's hear the story of the Subservient Chicken.
Ah, the chicken. Yeah, we're the people who built Subservient Chicken. But how did the most famous bird in the history of the internet come into being? Well, in 2004, Burger King and Crispin Porter asked us to help them launch the Tender Crisp Chicken Sandwich. The positioning was, chicken the way you like it. TV spots that nobody remembers today introduced the character of a guy in a chicken suit getting bossed around. We did the logical thing. We let people boss him for real. The site itself was incredibly simple. Type in what you want the chicken to do, and he does it. Want him to hula hoop? Make a sandwich? Do the hokey pokey? Just type it in. Ask him to do something naughty and you'll get a piece of his mind. We built the site, shot and edited the video, and created an enormous database made up of thousands of commands. It took off like nothing else before or since. It received over 1 billion hits, making it probably the most successful marketing website ever. It won every award imaginable, including multiple Cannes Lions. And it sold chicken sandwiches, driving double-digit growth for the Tender Crisp. But beyond that, the chicken practically invented a whole new kind of marketing. It used to be called viral, but really it's just the idea that brands can connect with people without spending money on media, by creating something so engaging that people just have to share it. We had known since the dawn of the web that it was possible, but it took putting a guy in a chicken suit to prove it to the world.
Right. So the Subservient Chicken really, it really was one of the most successful viral episodes in all of internet advertising, or all of advertising really in general. And it combined a couple of properties that really kind of point to the potential for the occasional internet campaign to go viral. First off, it was just kind of goofy. It was goofy. It was funny, but it was also highly interactive. This made no sense at all unless you, as the consumer, were actually interacting with that ad, typing in your commands, getting silly, having fun with it, and then as soon as you do that, if you had discovered it, it was something you wanted to share. And this was in the days when sharing was mostly people emailing links to each other, not a whole lot of social media sharing and things at that time. So this was really something that kind of almost took pop culture by storm in a very interactive way in which it just fed off of itself. That's kind of the classic viral campaign. Okay, so what are some other things just to kind of keep in mind for general internet advertising that might increase the chances that it's effective, that it's read, that it's noticed, that it's remembered, that it's acted on? One is kind of a media planning principle, in that the ad should be relevant to the user's interests. And so we do have a lot more media planning potential with all the user data that is available to website publishers. But you would like for your advertising to be relevant in terms of the ad matching the site, matching the user's preferences, and things like that. As a creative, that's not something you have much control over. But from a media placement and planning standpoint, that is a big part of it. Now, quick and easy to process. That is something that you as a creative have control over. Ideally, you want your internet advertising to be something that someone can look at very quickly and get the concept. And so in that way, it very much is like an outdoor poster, even though the ways in which we encounter outdoor posters are much different than internet ads. We often want them to work about the same. Just a quick hit, usually kind of a headline visual interaction as a creative concept. That's a pretty common concepting technique in internet advertising. And make your point, make it quickly, get the branding in there, give the viewer, give the consumer something relevant for a couple of seconds of attention, and then let them get on with the rest of their browsing. Okay, you often do like for your ads to be interactive, dynamic and interactive. So that's where animation comes in. Dynamic means you can actually change the content. You can ask a question with a headline, have that headline fade out, and then have the subhead that answers the question come in. You can have something that the user is going to click on if they're interested in, so that it takes them to more information, or it takes them to an expanded ad. And so this idea of making the ads dynamic and interactive, even though you know it's only going to be a very, very small portion of people who will technically interact with the ad, you might as well take advantage of that potential of the medium. Okay, so, and this is kind of restating the same thing. You want to communicate the main idea, the creative concept, the main information point, the communication objective. All that should come through without someone having to click on the ad. But if they do want to click on the ad, if they are interested enough that they want more information, then they can click on it and get more content that way. Usually by going to directly then to the brand's website. Okay. Most internet advertising has visuals and language together. Okay, so it does tend to be maybe a little bit more copy-driven than, say, video advertising. And so it's this idea of visuals plus language, and a lot of times, like I said, a really common creative concepting technique is the headline visual interaction, where one doesn't make sense without the other. And the visual then in that case can be fairly simple. It can be almost a label, but it's something that doesn't quite make sense until you see the headline. Audio, as we mentioned, audio should be under the control of the user. And so if your ad is really dependent on audio to be successful, you're less likely to have a successful ad, because a lot of people will keep their device muted and they don't want to hear the audio. So if you are going to use audio in your advertising, it should help, it should supplement, but you don't want it to drive the main concept or the main information point. Creative tips. Okay, so internet advertising has been out and around long enough that it's been pretty well studied. We're developing a good sense from a research standpoint in terms of things that work and things that don't work as well. And so in terms of trying to get strong memory effects and attitudinal effects or persuasive effects for internet advertising, these are some of the keys that keep coming up over and over. Have a strong brand presence. There's less need to have what are called reveal ads in internet than there is, say, in video. So a reveal ad is where the identity of the advertiser remains a secret until such point as the key moment. That's a reveal. Consumers don't typically process internet advertising the same way as they do traditional video, and so there's usually a greater risk to keeping the advertiser a secret. So try to get a strong brand presence throughout. Get that logo on there the entire time that the ad plays, or at least bring it in fairly early. Okay, your message should be clear. If you are using an animation technique that is a message rotation, where you've got 3-4 panels, each rotation should be kind of a clear statement unto itself. And it should kind of work in a way where you realize that not everyone is going to see the ad in the rotation where the first panel is the first thing they notice. They might glance at that ad when the third panel happens to be up. And so you want these ads to be short enough, i.e. 15 seconds or less, and then loop, so that if they look at it in the middle, they don't have to wait too long to get back to the beginning of the message. Keep your copy simple, keep your images simple. In terms of visuals, like I said, you want to keep the visuals simple, and kind of your two main types of visuals are people, probably faces, because you want to get in close. You don't want a whole lot of detail. Remember, these are really small ads. So close-ups of faces work well, and product shots. Those tend to be your kind of your two go-to types of images for internet ads. The ads should be self-contained. In other words, that you don't have to click on it and go get additional information for it to make sense. A lot of times you do see internet advertising used in integrated campaigns, and so there may be an overall campaign concept that is playing out in a variety of media, outdoor, video, 2D, all those kinds of things. And so you want to be able to try to find ways of working in those fully integrated creative concepts in a way that's fairly simple to make it work on internet advertising. And oftentimes that's very little more than the restatement of a key visual and a campaign theme line. Include a call to action is usually a good idea toward the end of an animated ad. As simple as click here to find out more. Click to find out more. And keep in mind that your advertisement is an interruption to what that consumer landed on that page to do. So you owe it to be entertaining. You owe it to them to not be annoying. All right, this slide I won't click on it here in the video, but I will place the Keynote and PowerPoint versions of this on Canvas so that you can check out this link. Just some really good examples of ways in which people are using social media advertising as ways of telling stories for brands. So I'd encourage you to look at that offline here. And then the last thing I want to show you is just kind of a little bit of a graphic on what are some of the more common mobile and tablet ad formats, because I think we're probably more familiar with kind of the banner ad formats, but the mobile and tablet ad formats are much more used now anyway, and we need to kind of learn how to design within them. And so one is the film strip, which can be vertical or horizontal, but it consists of kind of like a slideshow. It's several frames, multiple panels of advertising content that the viewer can swipe through. So that's the film strip format. Another is the pull ads, and they're usually positioned at the top or the bottom of your screen. And if you tap on it or pull on it, you get more content that way. So you get a little bit of a teaser on the header, and then you can interact with it and get more. It takes up more of your screen or a full screen, and you get more content that way. That's the pull ad. The crisp adhesion unit, which is kind of a complicated name for an ad that you see pretty much all the time on your phone devices. And the crisp adhesion unit simply means that as you are scrolling through whatever page or whatever piece of content you are looking at on your phone, and it's got an ad on there, the ad stays in the same part of the page. And so it doesn't scroll up with your content. It stays in one place and your content scrolls around it. That's a crisp adhesion unit. When those first came out, people found them kind of irritating, but they're not so invasive that I think people got used to them pretty quickly. And then last is the flex ad, and the flex ads are really being used a lot more right now. And essentially, the flex ad starts as your content is really, in terms of the important area of the content, that is, or your safe space, your safe zone, that's usually a square space. And then you've got additional background negative space area in your layouts that can extend beyond that. And that gives you then the possibility of allowing that ad to display in multiple aspect ratios and still be visible. Okay, so I've got a short video to end with on that. Okay, so you can see how these ads have preset aspect ratios, such as a 6 units wide to 1 unit high, 4:1, 3:1, or 3:1, 2:1, 16:9, even a vertical 3:4, or often goes to a 1:1 as a square. And each one of those aspect ratios that has been pre-designed in there essentially is a different layout. And so in this case, as the demo kind of pulls the ad into different sizes, it switches to the different aspect ratio format. But what happens when you see it on your phone or on your tablet is, if you change the orientation of your device, it will then change default to one of these other preset sizes, if that makes any sense. All right, that's it for this lecture, and we will kind of continue to discuss this, particularly the flex sizes, a little bit more in class.